Hello and welcome to episode 175 of the Book Binge and another top 5 video. Sorry, I'm doing 2 of these top 5 videos this month. Sometimes that's just kind of how the cookie crumbles, but I didn't really have any other extra Thursday videos to do this month before I start doing some other stuff relatively soon come October or so. We'll see what happens. So I decided to just include another one of these top 5 videos instead. This time, I don't know if I mentioned it so far, I'm pretty sure I didn't. I'm covering the horror books that I most want to read at the moment. First off, I might as well just jump right into things and start with a few honorable mentions. Let's talk about, oh boy, some big collections. Edgar Allan Poe has several horror short stories that I'm excited to get to. I'm not sure when I'll get to them over the course of doing Short Story Sunday stuff, but a couple of the horror stories that I'm excited to give a shot are The Black Cat and The Telltale Heart, which are stories that I have experienced in one form or another at one point in time or another and remember being great. I can't wait to reread those and get to some of his other stuff. H.P. Lovecraft is another author similar to Edgar Allan Poe that I want to read for a couple of his more well-known stories, such as The Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountains of Madness. There's a bunch of other Lovecraft stuff that I want to read as well. Everything in this collection I plan to read, but those are a couple of the more notable ones. I recently read Dagon, actually. At the time that I'm recording this, that was rather recently that I read that, and I loved that story, and it seemed to be a precursor to a lot of what Lovecraft is known for these days. So the fact that I loved that so much definitely has me encouraged to continue. And then I want to get to another honorable mention that was actually on the list originally, but because it's the one book that was originally on the list that I didn't own, I decided to include it on honorable mentions instead. By the time you're watching this video, by the time this video comes out, I probably own it, but at the time that I'm recording, I forgot to buy it in time. Dracula by Bram Stoker is one that I definitely want to give a shot for being a classic as well as being horror, and because it's kind of one of those, preeminent horror stories, kind of like Frankenstein is to some degree. It's definitely pretty different than Frankenstein for all intents and purposes and by all accounts, but it is one that I want to give a shot. Given that Frankenstein was one of my favorites, maybe there's a chance that Dracula will be one of my favorite books, just for some random reason. I don't know, it seems to have a slightly more polarizing, a slightly less positive general reception amongst the people that I know than Frankenstein does, for example, but who knows? Anything could happen. As for the list itself, let's definitely jump into it. The first one is a story that I initially had a little bit higher, but then decided to bump down just because it's maybe a little bit less horror than it is some other stuff like gothic and then family drama stuff. Blackwater by Michael McDowell is one that I definitely have coming from high recommendation from a friend, but also because several other people have read it in the past few months and all really liked it to similar degrees. Something about this sounds really interesting to me. I'm not sure when I'll get to it, but it seems like a fun horror adjacent story with horror elements to add randomly into my TBR somewhere, especially because it is split between 6 different sections. It was published serially, so maybe I would include those 6 different sections to read over the course of 3 or 6 months or something to make it a little bit easier to get through in the midst of other crazy reading schedule. Next up on the list in the number 4 slot is going to be a relatively recent acquisition at the time that I'm recording, Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian, also coming high recommendation from a friend. Apparently this is a horror western book, one that kind of splits the gap between the two, and let's just say that western vibes are kind of my thing in certain regards when it comes to books, even though I haven't read many westerns, and most of the western stuff I have read, like back in like middle school and high school, I didn't particularly love. There's something about the vibe that just works for me, and I really like a lot of horror material, so maybe a horror western in the form of Red Rabbit would be something that would work for me. Up next at number 3 is something completely different, not very western, and also maybe horror in a different way. I don't actually know what about Red Rabbit is horror adjacent, but The Terror by Dan Simmons is another book that I want to get to. Not just because of the horror elements, but because of the historical fiction elements, taking a horror angle of a lost expedition to the Arctic. Everything about this book sounds really amazing to me, and though of the people that have read it, most of them say that the ending is kind of all right and maybe isn't the best part of the book. The journey of the book from beginning up to the ending is the part that really makes it really shine. All of that is apparently done splendidly. That's the kind of stuff that I really like to read. I am definitely a climax and resolution type of person. I love when books end very well, but books that have a solid tone and that really make the journey worth taking the journey of the book, regardless of what the ending is, can definitely be really special, and I think The Terror could definitely do that for me. Number 2 on this list is a book that I didn't actually used to have on the list, but one that I'm probably going to be reading pretty soon. Not entirely sure, but might very well be reading pretty soon. That is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, a personal favorite of one of my friends, Reen, and I think Reen actually bought this for me, if I'm not mistaken, right? Maybe I bought it myself? Man, I don't remember. I'm so sorry if someone gifted me this book and I forgot who it was. If it was you, Reen, thank you. If it was someone else, I'm so sorry that I forgot who it was. Either way, this is one that looks pretty intimidating if you open it up to most pages, but there are other pages that don't actually seem that intimidating because they're pretty blank. But this is one that I might be reading for spooky season this year. We'll see how the reading plans turn out. There's always the chance that I won't have time. In fact, there's probably the chance that I won't have time, but it is one that I've become interested in over time because of Reen and because several other friends are going to be reading it in October. So maybe I'll give it a shot then with them specifically so that I have sort of read-along buddies to go with it. But number 1, the final item on this list is, of course, a Stephen King book. Most anybody would expect for a Stephen King book to be on this list unless I had read all of his books, which I most definitely have not done. But even though I plan to read all of Stephen King's novels, I'm picking the one horror book that I'm most looking forward to reading for the purpose of this video, and that is It. Legendary novel with a legendary reception. I first read the first 300 or 350 or so pages of this book back in high school and loved every second of what I was reading. But as I've said many times on this channel before, back when it came to books that I was reading back in high school, there was a lot of them that I read part of and then just never finished, not because I disliked them, but because I just didn't finish them. That was a bad habit of mine, between being depressed and being too busy with school and other stuff going on. I just never finished books regardless of whether I was enjoying them or not. That was the case with It. But I do remember those first 350 pages feeling like maybe 100 pages maximum. So I do want to come back to it. I do really want to read this one. I do think this book would definitely be an all-time favorite when I do get around to it. It won't be that long as far as the Stephen King reading order is concerned, but it will definitely be a little bit of weight nonetheless. But that is my very brief list of some of the horror books that I want to read very soon. Horror is one of those genres that I both love and hate in every context. Between books, there are some that I love, some that I don't. Movies, there are some that I love, some that I don't. Games, there are some things that I love and don't within the genre. The settings, the ideas, the stories, they can so easily be so fun and interesting and intriguing that I think the genre in and of itself is one of my favorites, even if I haven't read a whole lot from it, because I think some of the most memorable material that I've ever read is, if not horror books, but the horror moments within books, the little scenes that are meant to be a little spookier to catch you off guard in other stories, the horror moments that appear within a random Sun Eater scene are some of the most, forefront of my mind. Stuff like this, horror is something that can definitely be utilized to great effect, and I think reading some great horror stories, or some stories that utilize horror fantastically, as might be the case with Blackwater specifically, I'm very excited to read more horror. But this is my short list. If there are some more horror books that you think I should include on another list like this, or you think that I should add to my personal horror list that I want to read, shout some of those out in the comments below. When it comes to horror, I'm definitely not super familiar with a lot of what's out there as far as books are concerned, so there's a good chance I haven't heard of some of the ones that you have read and really liked, so definitely shout some of those out in the comments below. Regardless, thank you for checking out this video. If you did, I'll be back in the next one, whatever it may be.